Gen Alpha is starting to come online, which means Gen Z is starting to feel old, and it's the best thing to watch. Like, I saw a video of this Gen Z girl talking to her little sister who's Gen Alpha. It was just so fun to watch this Gen Z girl get like upset that she didn't know what the girl was talking about, and I wanted to be like, yeah, man, welcome to Millennials world.
Time's up. Gen Z's millennial era officially starts now. Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. And I kid you not, this is the discourse of today. This is what the internet is talking about today. Gen Z's millennial cringe era. You know, like, this is just one of those things that you never would think to say out loud, or even like something you think would happen so soon. Because in my mind, and I feel like in a lot of people's minds, Gen Z still feels like the new up and coming generation. I think Gen Z is just starting to have its main moment over the past year or two. And now hearing that the discourse online is that Gen Z are becoming the new millennials or have entered their millennial era is just a little jarring. And we need to talk about this because there may be some validity to it. And let's talk exactly about why. But really fast, if you are new to the channel, hello, I'm Rumi, nice to meet you. Could I shake your hand? Is that okay? Cool. If you like all forms of commentary, whether that be pop culture, media, or social commentary, then definitely subscribe to the channel because I do a lot of that. And also feel free to follow me on my other social medias on Instagram, TikTok. I know it's still live, shocker, and Twitter, all at Imurgency. But with that out of the way, let's talk really quickly about why Gen Z is getting millennial cringe allegations. And the short answer to this is the very fresh, the new arrival. Literally, as of filming this video, 20 days off the not chopping block is crazy. 20 days off the operation room is also not right. 20 days out the womb, okay, is generation beta. Yeah, beta. If you did not know, 2025 officially marks the beginning of generation beta, which just saying that out loud sounds insane because I think we just wrapped our heads around Gen Alpha being a thing and slowly becoming the newest group of people on the internet. So hearing that a Gen Beta is already here, Gen Beta is started, was a little shocking, and also has started and sparked conversations over where Gen Z falls in the whole generation line. Because as you know, Gen Z is getting older, and for the majority of us, we have entered adulthood, meaning that we're moving out of the prime years of internet creation and influence. Because generally when we talk about things like internet trends, internet culture, it is driven by the youngest generation on the internet or the younger generation on the internet. And honestly, every generation since the millennials themselves have had this trend. Millennials essentially ran the early stages of the internet, the first iteration of the internet. And then from around 2016, honestly, I would argue like 2018 to now, Gen Z has been the primary force running internet culture and pushing internet culture through different memes, trends, and just general Gen Z interests. And whether we like to admit it or not, that sort of mainstay in internet culture gives us some form of cultural capital. When it comes to modern culture on the internet, Gen Z kind of is that girl in that sense. And this isn't a slight to millennials or older generations on the internet at all, because virtually everyone's on the internet and everyone has their own group or form of humor that they really relate to. But what often happens is that as these groups age and get older, they are no longer the most dominant cultural force on the internet. They are not holistically running and showing the trends, as we see now with Gen Z. Now, where Gen Beta and Gen Alpha sort of comes in relation to all of this, is that for the first time for Gen Z, that cultural capital is on its way out. And let's talk about why that is by breaking down the different generations. We've done this before, but let's get a quick refresher. So for the sake of this video, we're talking about the four most recent generations. We have millennials that span from the years 1981 to 1996, defined by cultural markers like 9/11, the Great Recession, the Iraq War, and like political events. They were known to be the first digital generation, with the first people to grow up into social media and the internet. Then you have Gen Z, which spans from 1997 to 2012. In my notes here, the hallmarkers here for social political events that really galvanized the generation together are school unalivings and pew-pew violence, as well as the pandemic. Gen Z is the first truly global generation, which makes sense because of our generation's nativity with the internet. Like, we grew up when the internet was already a thing, and we're there and witnessed the rise of different social media platforms. And we're used to a world where you can talk to someone or interact with someone or play video games with someone from across the world, when that didn't always used to be the case. Then more recently talked about online is Gen Alpha, which is the generation below Gen Z, born from the years 2012 to 2024, making the oldest Gen Alpha right now 13. Gen Alpha is the first generation to have everyone in that generation grow up with technology at their fingertips. I think for like the eldest of Gen Z, there was still a bit of that transitionary period where social media wasn't a huge thing, hence the whole Millennial of it all. I made a whole video talking about Millennials if you want to check that out. But Gen Alpha is the first generation to have everyone be born and grow up in the age of social media. And allegedly they're said to have a longer lifespan than any generation, which shout out to them. Gen Alpha is also the most ethnically and racially diverse generation ever. And similar to Gen Z, but in a more impactful state, I'd argue, they're the generation that had their very formative years impacted by the pandemic. The oldest Gen Alpha was around 8 when the pandemic happened, and having the after effects of that in terms of quality of education, the state of the world, government fixtures, and all of that. That will most directly affect that generation as they grow up. They don't know that now. Of course, with all Gen Alpha just now reaching teenage years, the impacts of that are still yet to be fully seen, but definitely a factor there. And then finally, Gen Alpha's intro to the internet discourse initially started with them being categorized as rude, rebellious, not liking authority. There was the whole Sephora drunk elephant gate. I did make a whole video on that as well if you want to check that out. Gen Alpha has just grown up and has been socialized in a world with very different rules than I think previous generations, and also with one of the worst states of education in quite a while. So I'm very interested to see how that pans out. But that brings us to then Gen Beta, the babies. Like I said, Gen Beta started this year in 2025 and will go till 2039, which is insane to me. And Gen Beta is going to be the first generation born entirely in the post-COVID world, whatever that means. And they're also the first generation born in an entirely technological world. Gen Beta will not know a world without things like AI. The world that Gen Beta is going to grow up in is going to be an entirely different one than any generation prior. With the world being in the state that it is right now, with the global conflicts, the second Trump presidency, the wildfires, the wars, and the explosion of technological advances day by day, Gen Beta will definitely be different. And that's kind of the beauty about these different generations. Before we get into the millennialification of Gen Z, I just want to take a second to appreciate the uniqueness of every generation. Like every single one has their own unique cultural identifiers and things that they've gone through in history that inform and impact how each generation overall kind of comes out. And I think that uniqueness is beautiful. Like uniqueness, especially with Gen Z, really defines this generation. And in that same breath, uniqueness can also be something that can define your personal scent, especially with this video's sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service with a mission to empower each and every person to express themselves through scent. Scentbird is an affordable and flexible service with your first bottle starting at only $8 and then the next month going to $16.95 a month. You also have the flexibility to change out your fragrance every single month, avoiding the commitment and cost to pricey full-size bottles of fragrances that can go up to $300 to $500 each. This month I'm trying out 2 scents, one being by Matthew Zink and John Barbaros's Oud. They come in cute little packages like this, with honestly a great amount of product inside each month, so that you can always feel and smell good and expensive. If you want to get started with Scentbird today, you can scan the QR code or use code Imurgency55 to get 55% off your first month of Scentbird. You can get your first fragrance for just $8, with the next month only being $16.95. That's code Imurgency, IMURGENCY. Thanks so much, Scentbird, for sponsoring this section of the video. Let's now get into Gen Z's millennial cringe era. So, yeah, some of Gen Z online have realized now that we are 2 generations removed from being the youngest generation, that we may have a little bit of karma coming our way. Because I don't know if you remember. Actually, I don't know if you need to remember because it's definitely going on now. But over the past couple of years, Gen Z has had an amazing time memeing on, making fun of, and sort of having these culture wars with millennials, especially when it comes to platforms like TikTok. And honestly, I will say millennials did make it quite easy with a lot of the ways that they showed up on the early days of the internet and the ways that they currently use the internet, with things like the millennial pause or the millennial zoom, of being telltale signs of millennials using social media. With these 2 things specifically being identifiers of a group that grew up in the early infancy stages of the internet, with the millennial pause being the natural reaction of millennials who grew up on the internet, where you had to wait a second to make sure that the video was on before you started speaking, to make sure that the beginning of your sentence wouldn't get cut off, to the millennial zoom being the OG way to express emphasis, I think, before the barriers to entry for video editing became a lot lower and a lot easier. They say you can tell the difference between like a millennial zoom and a Gen Z zoom because millennials tend to use the finger zoom feature, whereas Gen Z tend to use a jump cut zoom. And just generally use zooms less frequently, less as a emphasis to their point, and more so to highlight something that the viewer has to focus on. And now, after years of making fun of millennials online, Gen Z is starting to feel that pushback from the younger generations, and some of us are genuinely fearful for what Gen Alpha and Gen Beta will say about us. So what have we done as a generation to combat this or to prepare for this? We've essentially been racking our brains to figure out what exactly Gen Alpha and Gen Beta are going to make fun of us for. And apparently the age shaming is already upon us, with people beginning to shame especially older Gen Z for the year that they were born, calling us old and unks, especially if you have a birthday that begins with 19.
What year does someone have to be born in to be considered old?
Oh, 2000, bro. Ancient.
2000.
Yeah, you're ancient.
I agree. What year does someone have to be born in to be considered old?
2000.
2000?
Yeah.
What year does someone have to be born in to be considered old?
I'm thinking like 19. If the year starts with 19, you old as hell, bro. Not gonna
Even
lie.
1999?
1999, old as hell, bro.
What about you guys?
I agree. 19 is too old.
1998, yeah.
What year do you have to be born in to be considered old?
I feel like 1990.
I think if you're born anywhere past 2000, if you under 2000, like if you're born in like the 1900s, that's old.
And honestly, the irony behind those videos specifically is that everyone in those videos were also Gen Z. Because again, the oldest Gen Alpha is 13, and those people were definitely older than 13. So that's honestly just the start, I fear. And things that people have said online that they're worried that we're going to get made fun of are things like the concept of eras and having an era in your life. Things like Delulu and the general feeling of delusion, feeling like we were the saviors of the world, that we were going to change this world for better, being overly sensitive, very politically correct, or just generally too woke, and other things like that that were definitely cultural identifiers for Gen Z, especially in the last 5 to 7 years. And this obsessive thought process of figuring out exactly what we're going to be made fun of for, what our issues are, what we can prepare ourselves for, is essentially the start of Gen Z self-cannibalism. Like I said before, Gen Z is getting older, and that's not to say that we're some kind of decrepit old people that need to go through some kind of intense crisis, but we're also just like not the youngest generation online anymore, or just in the world anymore. And while the majority of Gen Z right now is above the age of 18, in 4 years time, all of Gen Z are going to be legal adults. And with this very real truth coming at us very fast, and with our history with our elders, it makes sense why some of us in Gen Z are a little concerned for what Gen Alpha and Beta are going to make fun of us for. But like, first off, guys, why are we concerned about what literal newborns are going to make fun of us about? Like, let's be a little real, okay? But let's continue. The thing is, we really don't know what is going to be cringe for us. We don't know exactly what they're going to make fun of us for, because it honestly depends on so many things. Things like the social landscape when these generations are older, the political landscape of the world. Like I mentioned before, the whole Gen Z tattoo gate, if you remember from a couple years ago, and like the whole narrative of like, we grew up watching dystopian movies, so we're going to be the generation that changes the world from the ground up. We're going to have a revolution. While also being the generation that, yes, is very politically active and is very politically tapped in. That whole aspect of it could be considered cringy. And we also just generally can't control cringe. Like, there are just so many things that we as a generation do and have done over the years that we really can't predict what the dominant idea of cringe will be in the future. For example, millennials in the comments of the TikToks of millennials warning Gen Z that their era is coming and that there's nothing that we can do about it, said that they thought that it would be like the mustache trend where everyone was like, that they would end up getting made fun of for a lot, but instead they were just completely shocked that the millennial pause was something that was caught on to and made fun of. And that just kind of speaks to the idea that like, you're never going to know exactly what it is, what the tell for our generation is going to be until the time comes, because of the changes in the socio-cultural environment that we live in will change or develop. Like, Gen Z is a much tech savvier generation than millennials, so like, we're not going to have a thing like millennial pause, but what we might have is like the Gen Z shake, or like the different areas of influence or accents that we'd have on TikTok. You remember when like everyone would talk like this on TikTok, like nod their head and like have an upwards inflection when they talk? Like, I cringe just doing it, and I know you cringe just watching it, and I know you know what I'm talking about. I know you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's so much that we can be made fun of for. We just don't know what it's going to be, and that's okay. We have to be okay with that. And I think that some aspect of it is that like Gen Z as a whole is just really obsessed with the concept of identity more so than previous generations. And when I say identity, I don't mean in the regular way, like race, religion, gender, and things like that. I'm talking about identity in terms of like affiliations and interests, like cores, aesthetics, and things like that. And I think that that need and allegiance of our generation to have that understanding of the collective and the group is why we're sort of wanting to have this head start on what our future identity is going to be, as opposed to just letting it happen and figuring it out as previous generations have. And I guess as a question, if you're a millennial watching, were you thinking about what younger generations would say about y'all? Like, did you think that Gen Z would be making fun of y'all? Slash, if you did, are the things that we have made fun of you for the things that you thought you were gonna get made fun of for? Now I kind of want to take a pivot, and this may seem like it's coming out of left field because maybe it might, who knows? We're yapping here. But one thing that I've seen especially be like a factor for cringe for millennials from Gen Z and from generations around that I think Gen Z also has fallen into, but in a different sort of way, that might be what we get made fun of for, is the whole concept of self-infantilization. So let's talk about what self-infantilization is, at least in like a millennial sense right now. When I say self-infantilization, I'm talking about the feeling of like making yourself seem really small and capable and like and honestly like childlike. Like think of the millennial small bean era, the whole concept of adulting. And the general vibe of a lot of early millennial content, that millennials are made out to be like these innocent, fragile, childlike creatures that are forced upon this big bad world that they're not ready for or weren't prepared for. And they're essentially children or teenagers stuck in adult bodies, just trying to figure out the world and are forced to do these adult things like paying taxes or like working an adult job, running errands, whatever, what have you. That was huge. I want to say that the whole concept of adulting was huge from like 2016 to 2018. At least that's when I remember seeing it first online from millennials. It's still definitely a thing now, but I think that we really saw a lot of this, and honestly still do see a lot of it from millennials on social media, where this response, like if we're thinking about it in the terms of like fight, flight, or fawn, to like the pressures or the threat of like the world or society as a whole, is to fawn. Like the whole small bean adulting narrative is essentially fawning or trying to gain some sort of sympathy or pity from others that millennials did not necessarily feel ready for the challenges and the adversities of the things that the world ended up throwing at them and required from them in this modern era of adults. Because like we talk about often, and as many of us know, the American dream, or like the original form of that, was essentially dead before millennials, but they were continuously promised that that was going to be a thing for them. So they grew up and realized like, oh, hey, none of this is like what you said it would be. I'm not ready for this. And the response to that was to small bean. And I think that this is interesting because I think Gen Z experienced and is experiencing the same thing. But I think because the world is different and because Gen Z grew up a little bit different, seeing millennials go through that, our reaction to that is similar but also different. Like Gen Z definitely also has taken a sense of self-infantilization, saying things like, oh, I'm just like a 24-year-old teenager, or things like that. But like where millennials responded in a more fawning approach to this all, I'd say that Gen Z has taken a more aggressive fighting approach. And this again may go back to the whole thing of like Gen Z feeling like change the world and that we're rebellious or whatever. But I feel like if we're talking about and comparing these two different generations, if millennials are the crying baby small bean, Gen Z would be more akin to the tyrant toddler. And I think that again, that's because we saw millennials go through everything that they went through, struggle with the early and later stages of adulthood and adulting, and self-infantilize as like express themselves in the way that they express themselves online as a way to cope. Our response more so comes from anger, I think, and specifically anger with the expectations that are put upon us. Both identities being driven by the fact of like not being or necessarily feeling like we were fully prepared for the world that we were brought into, or in some cases we're like lied to about the world that we we're going into. But I think that Gen Z moves a lot through frustration, anger, and what some older generations may see as entitlement. And this might be something that we get made fun of for, is our sense of entitlement. Like we have high expectations for salaries and promotions and quality of life, despite not wanting to go above and beyond for our employers, and believing in the whole concept of acting your wage, wanting jobs and careers that fit our lifestyles and not the other way around. I think our generation really unsubscribes from the concept of like living to work, and are generally against the concept of like having our jobs be our entire lives. And our generation generally has a higher sense of purpose. So the jobs that we do want and do dream of are things that feel like we actually are making a difference or have an impact in whatever field that we may be working on or may be passionate about. Like we don't want to just be cogs in a machine. And while we do have to comply because we got to make money, we're less likely to opt for that and have actively worked to varying levels of success against that. Like, we're talking about recent news. Like, think about Gen Z's whole move to Red Note as a response to the government being like, we don't want you to have TikTok because it's a threat to national security, despite not really showing any evidence for that. So as a petty to the government, everyone went over to a Chinese-owned app that is primarily in Chinese called Red Note in a sense of protest to the government or authority figures for trying to control our freedom of speech. Like, our generation is one of the more connected generations and has access to a lot of resources that previous generations didn't. We have things like career content creators, videos showing the infinite different lifestyles that people have and that are attainable, as well as what jobs are out there that you may not have known if you had not been on a platform like TikTok. And I think that future generations are only going to have more of this. Well, depending on how things play out, if we're being honest. And all of this kind of puts Gen Z in a tricky spot in relation to newer generations, because again, we are yet another generation of new adults not hitting the typical adult milestones. And it's almost getting to a point where at this point, after a couple generations, maybe we need to alter what those adult milestones are or what the typical adult milestones are, because they clearly have not been the same for going on 30, 40 years now. And we're still dealing with the impacts of those events from previous generations while still shaping the world for future generations. So when it comes to Gen Z becoming the new millennials, yeah, we're becoming an older generation, but I think a lot of the core experiences that we have are going to be similar to previous generations. And even if not, something to highlight is that, like, I think we're going to have bigger issues than like who's going to be making fun of who, especially for like younger generations. Like Gen Alpha and Gen Beta are going to have some serious things to worry about, along with the rest of us, but like especially the younger generation, because they're going to be the first generations to have a full-blown climate crisis on their hands. And this time around, now that we're older, our actions are directly going to impact them. Like, I think that is kind of the piece that really shifted me and radicalized me, being like, oh my God, we are becoming the new adults because we're currently living through older generations' actions and we're feeling the impacts of that. Alpha and Beta are going to feel the response to our actions. Well, more so Gen Beta. So be mindful. But yeah, I think that our millennial cringe era is coming very soon. I don't know if it's necessarily upon us right this instant. I give it maybe 3-4 years. But hey, you know what? Maybe we'll have like a Gen Z rise. Okay, wait. Do you think like Gen Z is going to try and stay relevant for a while? Or do you think we're going to like bow out of social media? Because millennials did not try to stay relevant, but they're still definitely on the internet still, like definitely still a part of the social circles, still a part of the memes, still a part of TikTok. Do you think like our generation is going to be more so like wanting to stay in the forefront? Or wanting to stay more so on social media? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. Let me know in the comments. I think every generation has like a cutoff. I think maybe our cutoff is going to be AI because we're learning to adopt and adapt to artificial intelligence in our daily lives when those generations are just going to be like immersed in it. They won't know a world without it. Maybe that will be the cutoff. Maybe that will be the differentiating factor. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious. But yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you're new to the channel, definitely subscribe, leave a like on this video, and follow me on my socials at Imurgency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Don't forget to scan the QR code on screen or use code Imurgency down the link in my description to get 55% off your first box of Scentbird. That's code Imurgency. Thanks again so much for watching. I've been Imurgency, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.